In this edition of the Jedox training, we'll be covering the writeback options, which is some of the key features that sets Jedox apart from other BI software, particularly from typical data discovery tools. Jedox offers a variety of options for end users to write data back to the system, supported by an extensive set of allocation methods. The objective of this session is for you to be able to understand and use effectively the different writeback options. In particular, we'll be covering direct data entry on aggregates, data entry using functions, locking cells, undo settings, and audit. The Jedox writeback options are available in all front ends, so in the Excel integration, on the web, and on mobile devices, and you always write back from these front ends into the central server, so always one version of the truth. Everyone will see the changes that are made, so the current version, unless you put workflows into place which only write data back into the system if certain conditions are met. So Jedox fully supports multiple users writing back data to the system at the same time. That of course takes into account specific user rights, so you can exactly specify who, if at all, is allowed to enter data. Jedox also offers different audit and governance options that safeguard the process. For example, the ability to trace back every entry using the audit feature that will be covered in this session. In general, there are 4 options for data entry. You can write back into a view or on the underlying parload data function that is used in a view. You can use a function to write data back into the server that is specified in the function. You can use splashing, which is the option to write back on aggregates that are then distributed to lower levels depending on different distribution options. And there's a splashing wizard that supports this process. So let's have a look at how all this looks in practice. So here we're now looking at the Excel integration, but the principle for writing data back to the Jedox server is exactly the same in all front ends. So it works in exactly the same way on the web, nearly exactly the same way in Jedox Mobile. So let's start with the typical option for writing data back to Jedox, which is a view. So on the Jedox ribbon, we select view. So here we see now the database, which in this case is a clear jelly generated database, and also the related model. So in this case, sales, but writeback works in exactly the same fashion on any Jedox model. So let's create a simple report just with items in the rows and month in the columns. Maybe drill down so that we see a bit more detail. And as you can see now, we have now this simple report which shows products by periods, but writeback is sensitive in regards to where you're writing. So at the moment, we're looking at an aggregation. So we're looking at all years, all contacts, all payment types, and we're also looking at an aggregation here at the quarter. So if we go one step down, we can see now here we have now a base level element January, or the lowest level. We can immediately see this that the font here is not bold, but the top filters are still totals. So let's go down here to a base level as well. For example, to 2016, a particular customer, a particular payment type, and maybe budget data. So this means now we're entering data on a product level, forecasted quantity of sales for the particular product, and then in particular periods, and here for a particular customer. So to enter data, if you are on a base level element, so if every detail of your cell, so in our case, we're looking here in this case, all items is not a base level, so let's go down one more. So if every detail that's used in your cell, so in this case, the product 1000, the year 2016, the contact Tracy Green, payment status paid, budget as the scenario, and invoice quantity as our measure. So if everything here is on the lowest level, then we can write back data into the system just by entering the value. So for example, 1000. So we've entered now 1000. We can see that is now automatically aggregated into total products and total month. Yeah. And like this, you could now enter as much data as you want, and you always get the correct aggregation. So this is the simplest way of data entry on a base level item. But what happens, so we can see now here, we've got a total now in January of 1,300 for all products. What happens if you're trying to write on the aggregation? Let's say we want to change this to 1,500. We will see now we get an error message because the system doesn't allow us. It says you're trying to write on a consolidation on a total. And by default, that is not allowed to avoid errors, because if you enable writeback on a total, you could affect a lot of cells. So in our case, we would affect every product that is part of this total. So every product in all items would be affected. And if you look at it from a multidimensional perspective, if you have other totals here, like all customers and potentially regions and other aggregations, this means the writeback would affect the children of every total here. So if you would have all contacts here, we would write back into all contacts. And in many cases, one entry could affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cells. So you have to be careful with data entry and aggregation, and by default, that is not enabled in Jedox. But it is, of course, possible, and this is what we're referring to as splashing. So splashing allows you to enter data on an aggregated level. And the simplest form of splashing is the linear distribution or using an existing distribution. And we can initiate splashing by using a special character. So let's say, for example, if I use here now the hash sign 1500, we will see that now the difference to the previous value, so we had before the lower number here, the difference to the 1500 is now automatically distributed according to the distribution in the products. Yeah. If I do the same thing now in February, we will see, as we don't have an existing aggregation, if there's no existing aggregation here, then there's a linear distribution where every product in this case gets an equal share. Yeah. So just to go back, so let's look at the options for simple splashing. We've just used the hash key that distributes an entry on an aggregation according to the existing distribution, or if there's nothing used, it will distribute the values in a linear fashion. So every children of your aggregation or aggregations will get the same share. The next option is to increase data relatively. For that to apply directly in a view, you're using double hash and then the relative change. So let's have a look at this. So we're now back in our Excel, and let's say we want to increase this data now by 10%. So we're using hash plus 10%. And as you can see, we have now the 10% increase at the top. So 150 was added, but of course all children here are now reflecting this relative change. So a relative change using the normal data entry you can achieve by just using double hash signs. The next option that I would like to cover is the option to add a particular value on all children. So let's have a look at the syntax here. So the syntax for that is to use double exclamation mark. So double exclamation mark and a value will add this particular value to the underlying children in an aggregation. So let's have a look at this. So let's suppose we want to add 10 to every product here. So to do this, we just enter exclamation mark 10. And now we see every product here was increased by 10, and we see now the new related total. So the final option to use in splashing is to enter a particular value on all children. So with a single exclamation mark, I can write back a particular value on all children. So let's have a look at that. So if we want to, for example, have now 100 here for every product, the way we do is you just enter a single exclamation mark, 100, and now we have changed all the underlying values to 100. We would get the same result also if we do this here on an aggregation where we don't have any data. So if there's data there, it will be overwritten with the particular value that you specify after the hash key. If you have nothing there, then you get the same result. So those were the options to directly enter data into a view or into a Jedox data function, which is the typical one is the Palo data function, but there's other ones as well, but then they behave in the same way. So what happens is if a function is used in Jedox and you're writing on this, it doesn't overwrite the data in your spreadsheet, and it works in the same way on Jedox Web. It doesn't overwrite the function. The add-in is intelligent enough to know that if someone writes on a cell, it's not replaced by the entry, but it intelligently sends the data that is entered to the server based on the criteria that are used in the function. So in this case, we're sending data for all items this year and so on for all the other details. And that works not just in a view, but also if the Palo data function is used in any context. So for example, if we remove this now here to a different position on our spreadsheet and we're changing now the data to, let's say 300, we see the aggregation here was performed, and we also get the correct totals here. So it doesn't matter if you're using the data entry on a Palo data function in a view, or if you're just using the Palo data function anywhere in Excel or in Jedox Web. The next thing that I would like to cover is copying. So let's put this back where we had the data before, just to make this look a little bit nicer. So we have now our report, and let's suppose we want to copy data. We want to copy the data for Tracy Green into a different customer. And so now let's switch to, for example, party hire. And now if you want to copy data, the only thing to do is to use the keyword copy. So the syntax, how it works is you just enter copy into your cell, and then you specify what source do you want to copy. For example, if I want to copy the actuals in 2014 and I want to copy those into 2015, you just specify I want to copy the actuals of 2014. And it doesn't matter in what sequence you're using. So you would also get the same result if you're using copy 2014 semicolon actual. So you just separate your element names of your source and add them here, and you can use as many arguments, as many dimensions you have. So you could also specify copy the actuals of 2014 of a particular month and just specify the 3 arguments. But let's have a look at this in practice. So let's suppose we want to copy the data from Tracy Green. So we just enter now copy and then put in the element name. And as you can see now, we get an error because there's a space used here because our element name has a space. And this is a good exercise so that you remember when you're using an element with a space, you have to put it in double quotes. Jedox is already suggesting here the right course of action. So let's do this again. So let's say copy Tracy Green, but we use them now, or the element name with double quotes as it has a space. And now we can see we have now the data that we had previously entered in on contact Tracy Green. Let's have a look and see if this is true. So Tracy Green, we have 4,100, and the new one, we also have now the same value. And this is a great way to play around with different scenarios. For example, you have, like, say, a base case, you have a best case, and you can easily then copy the data for all your scenarios as you need it. So to increase number now with a relative increase, so let's say we want to increase the quantity by 10% compared to our previous element in Tracy Green. As a little exercise, think about what command you would use to achieve a 10% increase. So if you like, put it on pause. You can play around with your model and try this. So I'm now showing you the answer. So to increase the quantity, the invoiced quantity for party hire by 10% for all products, we use ## for a relative increase, and then plus 10%. And as you can see, we have now the correct total, 4,510. And we can also now really compare the two. If we just change the view and say we want to see now those 2 contacts in our report, just to see if that was really correctly performed. So I'm now selecting Tracy Green and Party Hire, those 2 clients. Press OK, paste. And now I see the data for both, and we can see for the total year, we had originally 4,100, which is the result of a few data entries. And we have party hire, which used initially the 4,100, but then we increased it by 10%. So our splashing operation worked. The next topic that I would like to cover is the like option. Like allows you to use an existing distribution for the value that you're entering. So for example, you could specify, I would like to enter a value of 10,000 and distribute it like the actual scenario, semicolon, in 2014. So the syntax is the value that you want to use, the like statement, and then the details in your model of the distribution that you want to use. And this could be between 1 to n arguments. It's always the maximum of the dimensions used in your cube. So if your cube has got 6 dimensions, you could theoretically use 6 arguments here, but you could also just use 1. So let's look a little bit at this in practice. So here we have now our report. Let's simplify this again and take the customer back to a point of view element. So we have our view here now. So to show you the like operation, we could do a simple scenario and just specify I would like to enter data in the second quarter, but distribute it like the data in the first. And to do this, we just specify here the value, let's say 5,000, and we want to distribute it like quarter one. Again, as we have a space here in our element, we have to use the double quotes. So QTR1 and then the double quotes closed. And now we see we're using now exactly the same distribution as in quarter one. We've got a pretty high number for the 1000 product, then a bit higher on consulting, DevD, and then lower on the other products here. So this is now the distribution. So the like command entering a number, but distributing it in a particular way. This is also quite helpful if you're using an existing distribution, for example, an actual distribution. So let's say, for example, if we want to use the distribution for the budget, for the new budget, but want to use the distribution for the actuals in the previous year, we could now specify we have, let's say, 10,000, but would like to distribute this like the year 2015, but the actuals there. So we enter the two element names. 2015 is the year scenario, and actual is the data type. And Jedox is intelligent enough, it will know what dimension you're referring to. So it will know 2015 is here and actual is in the data types. And now we can see we're getting an error here. So to do this, we just enter our value. So let's say we have revenues here of 6,000, and we want to distribute them like the actual scenario in 2015. So we're now getting a distribution here. So we're getting quite a bit in consulting and a little bit in 1000. So let's have a look if that is correct. So let's say 2015, but the actuals, because we used the actual scenario, and we see that was correct. So we're getting a fairly high number in consulting and a bit lower in 1000. We don't have anything else in the other ones. And exactly this distribution was applied for our budget. The next topic that I would like to quickly cover is the splashing wizard. The splashing wizard allows you essentially to do the same things that we've covered so far in this session, but it gives you a nicer interface. So let's suppose we are wanting to use now the splashing wizard for an entry in the fourth quarter. We can now go to the splashing wizard in the Jedox ribbon. Here we get now an overview of a few splashing options. So the ones that we've covered were the first two. And it shows us what is the detail for our data entry. So it shows us the database, the cube, and the relevant details, which is essentially exactly the same what we have here. So this is the first step, just to give you an idea where are we writing to. And then the next step is to specify the details. And here we can now use all the details that we have covered before using shortcuts. We can now use those with a wizard. So for example, to enter an absolute value into the fourth quarter, we could now just select here the absolute value that we want to use. So let's say 7,000, and use the default splashing and execute this. And now we can see the default splashing is the linear distribution, so that the new value was distributed equally to all the children. Let's have a look at the other options in the splashing wizard. So let's use again the generic splashing. So we also have the option now to add data here. So for example, if we want to increase not by an absolute number, but by a percentage, so we want to increase the underlying value by 10%, we could now specify here we want to add 10%, a 10% increase, and execute this. And now we see we have the 10% increase that, of course, was also applied to the underlying numbers. All other splashing functionalities that we've covered are also available in the splashing wizard. So for example, let's suppose we want to now simulate a new scenario. Just switch to a different scenario. Let's say work in progress, which is at the moment empty. But to copy our budget, for example, we can just select the highest level, which is all month and all items. And either just for Tracy Green or here also switch to the entire data set, so all contacts, and then just start the operation in the splashing wizard. So for example, here we can do the same thing as we've covered in copy and like. So we want to copy data, and the target cell is the cell that we've selected. Next, then we have to specify what do we want to copy, and if we want to copy, so we select here, we don't want to change anything, we just want to copy. And we want to copy the data from the budget scenario that we've just entered. So we go to data types, switch to budget, and now we will get the same numbers that we had previously in our budget scenario. So now we can play around and have a modified version of the budget with all the splashing features. One other important feature that I would like to cover is the undo options, which is often misunderstood. So you have an undo button here, but the important thing is before you can do anything, you have to select the area for which you want to track the changes. So for example, if we want to track the changes for the entire report here, we have to select this entire report. So once we've selected the area, we can click on the undo options, and the starting point, and that's very important, is to set reference for undo. If you don't set this reference point, nothing will be recorded of your transaction, and also you can't undo anything. So if you want to undo, if you want to use undo, you have to select the area for which you want to record the transactions, and then also enable that they can be undone. So we've done this now, we've selected the area, we've set the reference point, and now if you enter a change, so let's go to a more detailed level here to Tracy Green, and for example, we enter a value here for this product 100, and then maybe another one 200 here. If you go to the undo options, so press the arrow down, you can see now here 3 options: undo, where you can make a step undone. So if you click undo here, we can see that our last data entry is gone now. So in addition to the undo, the other options that you have is to either roll back all the changes that you've made since you set the reference point, or commit them. And only once you commit them, you will write back the data into the server. So let's, in this case, commit to them. This means that your undo options are gone, and the data is now written back into the system as normally when you enter data into Jedox. The next thing that I would like to briefly cover is locking of cells. With a cell lock, you can specify that you don't want this number to be changed by other entry operations. So for example, we could specify we want to have a value here of 150 for this product PMDD and in January. And I would like to lock this value down no matter what transaction happened to the database. So I can do this by clicking here on the lock cell button, and you can see it also changes the background color. So now if I apply an operation, for example, a splashing operation that would affect this value. For example, if I use exclamation mark 100, which writes 100 to every underlying child here of all items, you will see this was done. So it has written 100 to all the underlying cells, but with the exception of the one cell that we locked. So if you lock a cell, it will not be affected by splashing operations. And you can also not override it when you directly write on it. So it really locks down the cell. If you want to unlock this, you can either use the lock cell button and unlock the cell, or you can, if you have made multiple selections for locking cells, you can unlock all cells at the same time. So this is a quick overview of locking cells. The last thing that I would like to cover in this edition of the video is auditing. Auditing is the ability that every transaction, every writeback transaction that you make in the Jedox database is logged in a trace audit log file. And this log file is accessible via Jedox Web. So if you log on to Jedox Web, and you need to have admin rights to access this audit functionality, or have a role where this audit function or the usage of this audit function was specifically assigned. You can specify that you want to record transactions so that you have an exact audit log who has entered what data into the model. And to do this, you select your connection. So in our case, it's sasu.clearjelly.net. You select the database. So the database in our case is sasu demo. And then you specify the cubes. And we can see in our case, the auditing, so the recording of transactions into the system is already turned on. So we see for GL and sales, it's turned on. If we look now at the audit tab, so in audit, there's two tabs, audit and settings. In settings, you can activate the audit. And in audit, you can see what actually happened. So for example, in our case, we were working with sales and this database. If I now apply the filtering, I can see now all the transactions that we have made to our cube. So from the first one to the last one, so I can exactly see this was the transaction where we wrote back 100 into the system, so I can see when did it happen and also which user was it. And then it depends also what mode. So in our case here, I can see 2 is a splashing mode and 0 is the entry, the normal entry on a base level element. And so you can exactly control and audit what entries, what data, and who and when has entered data into the system. And of course, you could also see if changes were made on the same value. So for example, we've just added 100 using the slashing operation. So let's suppose we are changing this now to 200. And if you click on drill history, it will show you the changes on this particular cell. So it will show us we've changed the value to 200. Let's go back and now change it again to 300 and do the same thing again, drill history. And now we'll see both changes. So we changed it at this time, this user to 200, and then again at this time to 300. So you've got an exact audit trail on a particular cell. How was this result generated? The final topic that I would like to cover in this edition of the Jedox training is writing back data using a function. So as opposed to writing data directly into a report, we're using now a function to write data back into the system. And let's say, for example, we want to write back data into July of 2016 for this customer. This scenario very often happens if you have already data in a spreadsheet and you want to write back this data into a Jedox cube. So you already have a report, for example, and you write back this data into a report. So let's suppose we want to write back data in July, and we already have the data somewhere in the spreadsheet. In my case here, I will simulate now that we have the data already there. So this is, I'm putting in here a series and just continue this. So let's suppose we already had those numbers in a spreadsheet and we want to write these numbers now into July. And to do this, we can use a Jedox function, and it's a data function. So we just put the function, it can be anywhere, but as you will see, we just need to point to the right arguments. So if we use this here, we could now specify what cube initially we want to use, and in our case we're using the sales cube, so that's fine. The database is fine as well. But as opposed to reading data, we want to now write back data into the system. So we're using here set data. There's a process that helps us here, which is guess arguments, which scans the sheet for arguments that could be used in this context. So let's tick this and press paste. And now we see our function here. So we can now see what the function has produced. So we see the first argument is value. And value is actually the argument of the value that you want to write back into the database. So in our case, what we want to write back is the value here in cell P10. So if you just double click on the value and then click on P10, we see now this is the value that will be sent into the arguments that are specified here. So we see 1230 will be sent into this product. At the moment, it's December year to date, 2016, Tracy Green, paid work in progress and invoice quantity. And we see there's an error here. So Jedox, the guess function, has found the first item that makes sense. In this case, it's an aggregation. It's the December year to date month, which is obviously wrong because we want to write the value into July. So using the color coding, we can easily see that the issue is in C6, the green one, and we just change this to the right argument, which is July. So we change this here to K6. And the only thing typically that you have to be careful is how you reference the cells, and this could either be relative or absolute. So in this case, it would be completely relative. So if we copy this down, this means the argument would be also copied down, or the reference would be copied down, which we don't want. So we want it to be consistently the reference on this row, so in 6. So we need to change this, and to change this, which is an Excel function, is you just press F4. The first time I'm pressing F4 now, it gives me now a completely absolute reference in columns and in rows, which is not necessarily what I typically would want, because it could also be that I have multiple columns here, and then the reference always to July would not be right. In our case, it wouldn't matter because we only have this one row, but it's a good idea to get used to using the best reference type. So in our case, if I press now F4 again, I can see now relative in K and absolute in the row in 6. And that's what I want. So in case, for example, I have multiple columns here, it would always refer to the right column. So if I copy this data or this function to the next column, it would then refer to the next column L here. So, but this is at the moment okay for our purposes. So the functions or the arguments in set data, the first one is what value, which is in our case here in P11, but could be anywhere, depending on your requirements. So if you have an existing spreadsheet, it just depends on where is the data in your existing spreadsheet. False is a parameter that specifies if you want to write an aggregation or not. So B2 is the server in the database. Sales is the respective cube. So that's at the moment here as an absolute argument. Sales, we could also point to cell B3. And then all the following arguments, it depends on your cube. So in our case, the cube has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dimensions. So when you're using set data, you need to specify an argument for each dimension that is used in the cube. So in our case, the first argument is B11, which is the product or the item, D3, which is the year, E3, which is the contact, F3 is the payment status, G3 is the data type, and H3 is the measure. So we're specifying a reference for every dimension in our cube, and that's important. You need to specify every dimension. It could either be a relative reference where you just point on a location in your sheet that has an element name that is used in your dimension, or you could use an absolute reference, like in the same way as in sales, where you just specify, for example, for the payment status in F3, we could also use double quote paid. That would be would give us the same results. So, but in our case, all this is correct. So we can now press enter, and we can see now, you know that the function has worked when you see the value that you want to send in the database, when you see that as the return value of the function. So to see if it really works, we can just refresh the sheet by pressing F9, and we see now the value that we wanted to write in the database, 1, 2, 3, 4, is now here in the database. And to copy now all the values, or to send all the values into the cube, we can just copy this function down, and we see all of them have now as the outcome the same value as this absolute value that's in our spreadsheet. So again, let's press F9, and we see now the values are now in our database. So a very simple way to send data into a database. The other option is, and I want to quickly cover that as well, the other option is to copy and paste. So let's say you have absolute numbers in your database and you want to copy them. In this case, let's say we want to copy them in August. We can just use the copy command, and there's different ways. We could either use that using the quick access menu, and then we just mark the area where we want to copy it to, and it's important that they're the same size. But then we're not using the normal paste function that comes with Excel. If you want to send it to a database, we have to use the paste values in cube view. That sends the value to the database. So if we use that now, we see now the data that we had in our spreadsheet. And again, this could be an existing spreadsheet that you want to load into the Jedox database. You do the normal copy process that you know from Excel, and then paste, you use the paste values in cube view function that Jedox provides. So this concludes the options for Writeback. So you've seen now the simple entry, you've seen splashing, where you change values on an aggregated level, and you've seen the splashing wizard, where the shortcuts that you can use with splashing are available in an easier to use, more user-friendly interface, so you get exactly the same functionalities there. And then finally, we had a look at the audit trail, where you can see how your entering of data is recorded in our case in the meantime. So we've done quite a bit of additional data, but we can see so all the set data functions that we executed before, all those operations are now recorded here as well. So this concludes the Writeback session of the Jedox training. As always, if you have any questions, please contact us, and we're looking forward to see you at another session of the Jedox training.